Speed on me.
All right, this is Mike Cronin, September 25th, take 2.
Let's change the framing a little bit. Great. Well, I'm thoroughly enjoying speaking with you, sir. Let's talk a little bit about the returning warrior. And one of the grave concerns or serious concerns for the military of today is reintegration into home after periods of in combat zones. When you and we could look to the experience of the Vietnam POWs as an extreme of reintegration. You came back, and not only had the country changed, the world had changed. There were many things about the politics of the time that, in a way, you were held up as the poster child of one of the few successes in the country's mind of the war, and yet you had all gone through these personally difficult times, and I imagine there were times when what the country saw you as and wanted you to be was a different thing than you felt you wanted to be acknowledged for or you understood yourself to be. Speak to me about the returning warrior. What ways were there things in your family life or your home life or your corps, your military corps, that helped you reintegrate, or things that did not do such a good job and that you would do differently or want differently for others?
Well, it was a mixed bag. My family life was very difficult. When I was shot down, my status was missing, presumed captured, and I had the good fortune of never having anything that I wrote for the Vietnamese released as propaganda, what have you. So there was no evidence that I was alive other than hope. And so my wife and I'd only been married less than a year when I was shot down. And so she didn't know I was alive, and I didn't get any mail, didn't send any mail for years because I just wasn't given that opportunity. And so her life went on, and by the time I got back, a lot of things had happened. We're two different people than we were when we first got married, and our marriage did not last. We got divorced a couple of years later after struggling with each other for all that time. So that was a hard part. The Navy part was overwhelmingly positive and welcoming. The deal was that when you returned, you were assigned to the hospital nearest your family. My wife had moved to San Diego, and so I was assigned to the Naval Hospital in San Diego, along with 50 other guys. So right in the San Diego area, there were other guys having similar problems and health issues and all kinds of things that I could stay in touch with. That was very positive. One of the other things was that the Navy base at Miramar, which is now a Marine Corps base, but at the time was a Navy base, one of the squadrons out there said, "Oh, anybody that wants to do a little flying, come on out and we'll take care of you." And so after a month or two of recovery and whatnot, I started doing that. And the commanding officer of the squadron said, "Well, if you want to stay here and be assigned here, I'll ask the Bureau for you to be assigned here." So that was I had just enough flight time and experience that the Navy didn't require me to go back to the training command for retraining. The squadron I was assigned to at Miramar was an instrument training squadron. So that's the kind of work we did, along with a lot of other utilitarian things that the Navy asked us to do. So I fit right into that, and I stayed there until 1976, when I left the Navy and went with American Airlines. So my Navy experience was very positive. No issues or complaints whatsoever, and as I have learned from the experience of others, the Navy bent over backwards to make life as good as possible for those returning. But it was a very stressful time. I had family problems. I could not see myself staying in the Navy long-term. I was looking for an airline job, and that was the worst time to be looking for an airline job because they were laying people off. And so a lot of things were going on. My life was a series of crises. There was so much stress and strain getting reestablished in a new life after return from Hanoi that I really didn't have much time to even think about my past experience.
Interesting. So you were your time in Miramar, I believe Charlie Plum would have been there at the same time.
I'm not sure about that. He was not in my squadron at that time, anyway. Maybe he was later.
If you would, I'm wondering whether your the meaning of freedom changed for you over the time when you were first shot down to your return home. Like, so many of your fellow former POWs have talked about the little moments when they could go walk out the door and there was no one to
Sure.
Speak to me about that.
Well, of course, that's true for myself as well, although I don't imagine that I really thought about it that much. I mean, I knew, of course, it's great to be free, and the first time that I really felt free was only a few days after I got to the Balboa Naval Hospital. I was in good enough health. They said, well, okay, you can go sleep at home. You don't need to stay here in the hospital anymore. And that first night at home in my house in my own bed was when I first really felt free.
And I understand you're a fisherman, but when you go out and you're on the edge of the water, does it ever come back to you just what it means to have that?
I do a little fishing, but I'm not a serious fisherman. I do it every once in a while. So what I do enjoy is out there where I live, it's very easy to get down to the C&O Canal, and there's a path that goes along the canal for a long distance, which is a great place to go for a walk or a jog. And there's also a big wildlife management area, which is for all practical purposes a big park, a couple thousand acres. Great place to go for a walk with your dog. And I'm fortunate, I live in a nice area where it's possible to do that.
And do you ever find yourself on one of those walks just thinking about, like, someone told me a quote, true freedom is only appreciated by those who have paid the price to find it. You know, like I like in that sentiment, freedom has to mean more to you than those who were just given it easily and they've never.
Well, oh sure, I think that's true, but I have to say I don't think about it in that way very much. But of course, what you say is absolutely true.
Okay. And you went to the Naval Academy, sir?
Yes.
Because the first audience for this is young midshipmen,
Sure.
future leaders. If you could go back in time to yourself as a young midshipman coming out of Leave Summer or going through your scholastic experiences or anything, and reflect back on your life now, if you could go back in time and say something to yourself or to another young midshipman about, hey, fella, here's something to think about, what would it be?
Well, I would say when I was a new midshipman, I wasn't a happy person because plebe summer, as it was run then, was not very pleasant, and it was kind of lonely and didn't have any personal freedom. And it didn't take me more than a month or two to figure out how many days were left until graduation. And so I knew that right away, and I was counting down those days until I would be free again. And what I would try to counsel midshipmen is, when you're a midshipman and there are a lot of unpleasant things going on, maybe you don't like some of the classes, maybe you don't like Bancroft Hall, whatever it might be, don't focus on that. Look ahead and focus on the life that awaits you once you complete this task of being a midshipman. And whether you like it or not, or know it or not, while you're at the Naval Academy, you're going to absorb a lot of things that will help you in life. So value that experience, even though it's probably not as much fun as you would like it to be. Now, I know things have changed a lot at the Naval Academy since I was there, so I can't really speak to the nuts and bolts of how you live, but look to the future, do the best you can, and the Navy will be good to you as it has been good to me.
Were there things that you learned or experienced through your Naval Academy experience that put you in good stead for what you went through in Vietnam? Did you look, in reflecting back, do you think, you know what, I'm really glad I had that?
Well, I got a good education. I was very grateful for that. And in the English and History department, I read some very good books. And I thought the Naval Academy helped me a lot. I wasn't very well prepared. I didn't have the best record in high school, but I learned a lot at the Naval Academy, and it was a very positive experience for me, even though at the time it didn't seem like such fun. It was a lot of hard work and not as much personal freedom. Perhaps things are different now. Midshipmen may have more freedom than I had when I was there. But it was a very valuable experience, and the best friends I have ever had were the classmates in my company. And when I got married a second time, more than 25 years after graduation, I sent out invitations, and people came from all over the country to come to my wedding. Some of them I had not seen for 10 or 15 years. So the friends you make as a midshipman will be your friends for life.
Beautiful, beautifully said. And was there anything that you chafed at in your experience at the Naval Academy that later on and perhaps in Vietnam you thought, you know what, that was good for me. It now helps me.
Well, of course, there was military discipline all the way along, and chain of command, being part of the group, all that was very positive, and it helped.
I understand that whenever there was a new shoot down, the first order of business would be to get contact and find out the person's name, but the second question was always, what's your rank? Everyone needs to know where they fall in the order. And that's an aspect of military training that the civilian doesn't really understand, but is essential, sir. Is that correct?
Yes, it is, and in fact, that was an issue. Suppose, for example, that when you're shot down, you're a lieutenant junior grade. And 2 years later, a contemporary of yours is shot down. By that time, he's lieutenant. Now, you're the same age, the same date of rank to start your service, but because that person was outside longer, he got a promotion. And you probably got a promotion because promotions were automatic while you were a prisoner, but you don't know that. There's no record of it. So he's senior to you all of a sudden. And that was an issue that caused some intense discussion within the prison system. How do we work that out?
There was a mix of both Air Force and Navy senior leadership.
Yes.
In your estimation, how well did that integrate? How well did they coalesce obviously there's rivalry between the corps, but here's a time when they have to work together.
Well, there were two guys who were very well recognized as heroes of leadership, one Air Force and one Navy. Stockdale, in our case, with the Navy leadership, and Colonel Reisner in the Air Force leadership, both of them did fantastic job.
Speak to me about Stockdale, because this is for the Stockdale Center for Ethical Leadership, and obviously looking at his leadership choices and some of the sacrifices he made is a source of inspiration for a lot of young midshipmen. In your experience, how did you, one of the things that was remarkable was how well you all did under what was effectively a virtual leadership. Stockdale and the other Alcatraz 11 were sequestered at Alcatraz. Getting communication across to the other camps was difficult at best, but somehow you all worked together and thrived, and part of that, I'm sure, is due to his leadership. Can you speak to that?
Yes, his leadership was exemplary. He made every effort anybody could possibly make to establish standards and directives and exercise reasonable leadership. Couldn't possibly be criticized. I would never have any criticism of his leadership. And I would say the same for Colonel Reisner. Just a matter of where you were and so on, who you had actual contact with, because issues came up every so often that would require some decision and leadership on the part of the senior people. So that was very important. And I would say there are several things that could be a severe disadvantage to a person who becomes a prisoner. Number one is to be senior. Number two is to be injured, because you're not going to get the best medical care, and that's going to be years of suffering that you'll probably have. And number three, as was McCain, to be a known person in the outside world because his father was a very senior admiral. So, and all the senior leaders had at least one major disadvantage. They were senior, and because they were senior, the Vietnamese focused on them to keep them away from us, prevent them from exercising leadership, and to keep them as much as possible out of sight and out of mind, and have more junior people trying to exercise leadership that they didn't have the rank to exercise because of so many people being at their level. And they made serious effort to try and undermine the leadership in every way that they could. And the leaders that we had rose above that and did what they were supposed to do, and they did it in a fantastic way.
Wonderful. Yeah.
Do you want the head of that again, but with Stockdale's name instead of he? Can you cut it?
I can cut it.
Okay.
Yeah, thanks.
And they continued to exercise leadership after return by monitoring the career progression of their fellow, of the people that had served under them as they stayed in the Navy.
That is an element I've never heard referred to. Thank you. So the senior leaders in the Hanoi Hilton or the Hanoi prison system actually followed the progress of those who were incarcerated with them upon return. Is that what you're saying?
Well, in the Navy, I know I can't speak for the Air Force. I'm not saying anything negative. I just don't know the answer. But I know that in the Navy, the senior leaders made a big effort to monitor the careers of the people under them who stayed in the Navy.
Wonderful, wonderful. Were you aware of the sort of brutality that then Commander Stockdale was experiencing, or when the Alcatraz 11 were taken away, I imagine that was felt as a pretty big gulf in the immediate aftermath of it. Do you recall that event, and can you speak to that?
No, I don't. I'm not clear on the date that happened or where I was on that date, but we knew that they were having a hard time from beginning to end, and we all sympathized with them and supported them.
And was there a way that when someone was passing information down the tap code, down the line, that you understood immediately, this is coming from senior leadership, this is...
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, no
Can you
question.
talk about that? How would you know?
Well, because I personally never had any contact with Stockdale because I was way down at the bottom of the chain of command, and things were passed to me, but always passed with the information that that's the directive coming from Stockdale. I mean, that was absolutely straight because it's a military organization and everybody respected the chain of command and how it's going to work. When something came from Stockdale, it was made clear, okay, this is coming from the top.
And talk to me about when those structures would come down, how did they make you feel? Did it sort of, was it strengthening? In other words, someone's in charge, we're all unified. There was a way in which, in the solitude that you were experiencing in the isolation often?
Well, actually, when I was in solitary confinement, I didn't get any information. That's what solitary was all about. And for me, that was only about the first 6 months that I was there. Now, after that, I was always in a cell with one other person, perhaps, usually more. It depends on, there's a long history of different places and different situations. But yeah, well, you got to take it as it comes. The senior officers, mostly Stockdale in my case, but Reisner as well, they made decisions and they issued orders. And most of them I agreed with. That's exactly the way it should be. That's how we should do it. But not always. Some of them I disagreed with, but it's not my choice. That's how a military organization works. Leadership comes from the top. It was very positive that we had leadership coming from the top, that we had standards and rules of conduct and so forth. I didn't agree with all of them, but boy, it was great to have that structure and you know where you stood.
That's wonderful. You know, that it's one of the strengths of the American military mind that is the case. There was a story about when the Stockdale Purge went on. They were trying to identify who was the ringleaders of communication and authority in the camp. And when it was finally became evident it was Stockdale, that's when his knee was broken again. And but the Vietnamese kept asking the question, who's the Central Committee? We need the names of the Central Committee. And Stockdale kept saying, there is no Central Committee. In our system, you take me out of the equation, the next guy is going to step up and you keep taking it. And eventually, he just said, all right, I'll write all the names of the Central Committee. And he was able to write 235 names of POWs who was the population at the time. And two things happened in that moment. One was they were shocked that he knew, because they had kept him isolated, every man who was in the camp. And the other was that he was saying to them, this entire thing, this system, the American military, is the Central Committee. Coming from the communist point of view, there's a central Politburo, and then there are those who just
Sure.
take this, and in their mind, if they could take out that Central Committee, the rest of you would collapse. But the truth is, each of you was steeled in individual resiliency and trained to not only survive but thrive. So it's one of those things of the differences. Were there aspects in any of the Vietnamese interrogations that you found sort of, as Bob Shoemaker said, he went through extensive interrogation, but one of the things they really wanted to know was how many chickens his father had, who was a lawyer, obviously, and didn't have any chickens, but Bob finally told him 35 chickens, and which think was a mistake because that meant he was in a wealthier class and therefore, but was there anything like that where the Vietnamese were coming at you in ways that?
Well, their culture is completely different, but I want to go back to something you said a moment ago about the list of names. Now, anybody who has followed the POW issue knows that there's a big issue about POWs who were not returned to the United States. My personal belief, can't prove it, it's just my belief, is that that was never the case. And why was it never the case? Is because the Vietnamese caught us communicating so many times, and like that example you gave of Admiral Stockdale, they knew that every one of us knew who all the other prisoners were. And aside from group unity and standards, that was one of the main purposes of the communication. Everybody was required to memorize all the names. And the first question you got when you got to Clark Air Force Base in the Philippines was, give me the names. And everybody had to write down all the names they knew. And so if you look at the situation at the end of the war, in very brief terms, the Vietnamese got everything they wanted. What could they have done to queer the deal and get the war started again? It would be to make the stupid mistake of holding back prisoners and being caught at it because we had all that information. They knew we had information. They didn't know how much we had. We even knew there were 9 Laotian prisoners of war which were brought to Hanoi. And within a week or so of them arriving in Hanoi, even though they were kept in a separate facility, we knew who they were and what their names were. We knew all that stuff. And if you try to think what would be the motivation of the Vietnamese to hold back prisoners when all the names were known to all the prisoners being released, and how would that work? I just don't think they were dumb enough to take that mistake, that risk, and there's no good reason to do it.
Interesting, sir.
Now, Red McDaniel believes the opposite, and you can ask him what he thinks about that when you get a chance.
You were spending 24/7 in cells, and minutes turned into hours, hours turned into weeks, weeks turned into months. There was an enormous amount of time that you had to find to occupy yourself and to keep yourself as healthy as you could. One of the 2 aspects that the Navy would like to look at is what were your opportunities for PT, and how did you exercise them, and what were the standards you set for yourself in terms of keeping your body as strong as you could?
Well, of course there was an excessive amount of dead time, no question about it. But almost everybody, just like if you watch any movie about prison situations, you see guys exercising. That's what they do. That's what we did. Most people exercised every day. I can remember running in place in a tiny little cell when there really wasn't room to do it. Doing push-ups and sit-ups, all the usual stuff. I had a routine I went through, which was something, when I was a young officer, there was a program that was very popular, which got started in Canada with the Canadian Air Force, called 5 Basic Exercises, and it had various levels for age and so forth. And that's what I did, 5 basic exercises as much as I could every day. And it wasn't just me, I wasn't an exception. That's what almost everyone did.
Interesting. creatively and in a healthy way use the time?
Well, yes, I would say when you think about that situation, you think about how awful it is to be in that isolated, dead environment, and it is awful, but there are a few positive aspects of it. I'll give you an example. If I want to know what the date is, I have to look at a calendar. But I knew what the date was every day while I was a prisoner. And one of the things I did, along with the stuff you've already named, which I did also, was go over college courses that had seemed difficult to me when I was at the Naval Academy. And with the absence of distractions and the power of concentration, you can figure those courses out, and it's much simpler than it seemed when you were at the Naval Academy and in a big rush to do things and didn't really have time to study and analyze the way you should to understand some of these serious engineering courses that I took. So, yeah, the power of isolation and absence of distractions enables you to concentrate much more than you normally would be able to do in life. That was the good part. Of course, the bad part was that the hours dragged on and on and on and on, no question.
And you also helped each other. My understanding is that you would identify talents or knowledge in each other. There were people who were teaching French, who were teaching sailing. Talk to me about the way you worked as a community.
Well, absolutely. It all depends on what your situation was. For a long time, I was in a cell with one roommate, Ralph Gaither, and I picked his brain, he picked my brain. But later on, when you're in larger groups, that was a much more positive environment because there might be somebody who spoke French that you would want to learn a few words, or there might be somebody who was really good at math that could teach a course or something. And yeah, I participated in anything to pass the time, absolutely.
And I imagine in some ways you got a really good education from some of these things. As you said, the ability to concentrate without distraction. And on that note, when we, in modern society, I don't know how you feel, but I go into a coffee shop or I'm in a public place, a restaurant, and I look around and everybody, a couple is on a date and each one of them is buried in a cell phone. And there seems to be a trend in modern society of an increasing inability to just be alone with oneself and relax and just take in what's around us. But that strength had to come into play in a big way in your experience in the anti-prison systems, because you had to rely on each other and yourselves to be the resource of both entertainment, of education, of physical therapy, of all the things that you needed to thrive.
Well, that's true, but the downside is there was never enough. There are always questions that couldn't be answered. And we found, we developed, not me, but it developed as a group, a solution to that problem is, okay, we'll find out when we get out. As you disagree with something, I think A, he thinks B. He said, okay, rather than argue about it, we'll make a 5-cent bet and we'll figure it out when we get out.
Bob was telling a story of, was it a peach brandy liqueur? At some point along the way, the Vietnamese gave you each a little, maybe a quarter-inch of this liqueur, and you decided to put it all together and raffle it off. Do you remember this? Were you part of this?
No, I wasn't part of that. I don't remember ever getting anything like that. The cells I was in, you might get, on Christmas Day, we'd get a 12-ounce beer to be shared by 2 people. That was all the liquor I ever got.
The Vietnamese did have a sentiment around what I guess was a holiday for them that coincided roughly with Christmas, correct? And you would, at that time, there was some...
There's a substantial Catholic population in North Vietnam. So they recognize Christmas. Now, they, they have, at the time, I remember, the Catholic Church had big issues with Hanoi because communist government, the government picked the bishops and so forth, rather than them being picked in Rome. So there was a big issue, but there's a substantial Catholic population in North Vietnam.
And you, I believe you mentioned you were Catholic, sir. Was your faith a factor in sustaining you in?
No, I'm not a religious person.
Okay. And is there, for someone who has paid a price for freedom, who knows the price others have paid to assure freedom, for yourselves as individuals, for each other, and for your country, is there times when you look around in present society and wish people understood more what does freedom mean to you, sir?
Well, freedom means to me living in the United States. I've had the luxury of traveling in a lot of places in the world, and there's no place like the United States. All the places I've been, including I've been back to Vietnam once since the war, have good things about them, but there's no place like the United States. That's what freedom is all about.
And we have talked about the TAP code, but I'd like to, the TAP code was on one level a mechanical system, right, for communication.
Sure.
But what it came to represent, what it came to be, was the backbone of the very possibility of cohesion. And
Yes.
So can you speak to me about the bigger picture of the TAP code, of the ways that you, for instance, personally, and maybe with an anecdotal story, I mean, it seems to me from the chronology you gave from your first arrival, you would have gone some number of months before you were even introduced to the TAP code, and apparently quite a bit of time before you even were in contact with another American. So sort of trace that to when you became fluent with the TAP code and began to understand the ways that it could reinvigorate you, and et cetera.
Well, yes. As you say, I did not have contact with another prisoner until Paul Galante had the courage to speak to me verbally with some risk. And that's a key thing. In order to get a new prisoner into the system, somebody has to take a risk, because the new prisoner doesn't know the TAP code. Somebody has to tell him how we communicate. Paul Galante did that for me. And I had already been a prisoner. I can't remember the exact date when this happened, but I'd already been a prisoner for a couple of months. And it was at least another month or two before I got a chance to actually use it, because that's the first time I was in a cell, next to a cell occupied by another prisoner who knew the TAP code. And so that was a big deal, to get into the group, find out who's dead, who's alive, who's here, because I had friends who had been shot down, fate unknown. Were they alive? There was one fantastic surprise I got. When I was on the Midway in the summer of 1965, one of our, not in my squadron, but in our sister squadron, guy was shot down, and we did rescue missions and searched the area for a couple of days. No evidence that he was ever alive. And it turns out that what had happened, he was in a steep bombing dive, airplane was hit, lost control, and he was not able to pull out of his dive. And what he actually did in his attempt to pull out with this damaged airplane is hit a ridge, a glancing blow, and ejected on the first bounce. And so pilots in the air saw the crash and a ball of flame. They didn't see the parachute. They were pretty well convinced he was dead. Within a week or so of my getting in the communication network at Little Vegas, I learned that he was alive on the other side of the cell block.
Really, what was the name of the?
That was, I'll think of his name in a minute. I'll give it to you.
Was it? It wasn't Mulligan, right?
Oh, no, it was it was a Navy guy.
No problem. It'll come to you.
It'll come to me, yes.
You mentioned the Midway. We're going to be shooting on the Midway, actually. There
Yeah.
two of Bill Stark and George, what is it, Ench?
Jack Hance, yes.
Are docents on the Midway, and we're going to interview them on the Midway. Do you have fond memories of your time on the Midway? Can you say something about your time on the Midway?
Well, I've been back to the Midway. My son lives near San Diego, and on visits that I've been out there, I've gone to the Midway Museum several times, actually been to the Ready Room that I served in during the war. And one of our squadron airplanes was taken out of the boneyard and lovingly restored by a bunch of retired squadron guys, and it's on the Midway on display.
What, can you tell me the class of that aircraft? I'll look for it when we're there.
It's an A4.
It is an A4.
Yeah, and it's painted up with squadron colors and everything. VA-23.
VA-23, thank you, sir. That'll be sweet to see that. And that's not a plane you flew, it's the style of plane you flew, correct?
Well, I may have flown it.
You don't know?
No.
It was A4s it was an A4 you were shot down in?
Yes.
Yes. Do you need another little break? We're nearly complete.
No, we can go ahead. That's fine. Yeah.
Because this is the project is called Return with Honor. We want to examine how honor as a force, as a commitment, can motivate people and sustain people in difficult situations. Was that the case for you, sir? That you found that when those words return with honor, did they take on more meaning over time, or was it?
Well, I think it's two things. Number one, you don't want to lose the respect of your fellow, shall we say, colleagues in arms. That is the main thing that motivates you. And that's true in all military organizations faced with the enemy. The most important thing is not to lose the respect and friendship of your fellow combatants. That was the main motivation. And just on a personal level, you didn't want to come home feeling that you hadn't done the best you could do. Sure, you want to think, all those things matter. Okay, we want to do this together. We don't want to have anybody think badly about the group. But as an individual, you want to retain the respect of your comrades, and you want to have personal respect that you did the best you could under the circumstances. You did what was expected of you. That's the main thing.
So speak, if you would, what I hear you saying is, and if you could, if you would say this to the midshipmen, the value of their personal honor. Can you?
Well, it's, when you're a midshipman at the Naval Academy, you'll hear a lot of talk about your service reputation. And every midshipman knows, or should know from what he's been told, how important your service reputation is. And this is not about being a prisoner. This is just about being an officer serving. You need the respect of your fellow officers in order to progress and have a successful career. Because if they don't trust you, if they don't believe in you, you can't possibly succeed. And so your service reputation matters immensely. If you want to take that now to the prisoner situation, you have to have the respect of your fellow prisoners, that you can be trusted, that you can keep secrets, that you can do all these things that are needed to do for the organization to survive. That is the most important thing.
And was, I'm assuming that you had some pretty dark times in the Hanoi prison system, that you felt challenged to want to pick yourself up or whatever. I'm assuming that you went through some very, very difficult times.
Well, actually, sure. You can always say that the torture was the most difficult time and how awful it was, and it was awful. But you know what? After a while, the pain is forgotten. There may be some injuries that gradually heal, which I had. But it's not like I or most other people spend a lot of time thinking about that. It's past. It happened. Psychologically, the most difficult time was years later. Now the treatment has improved somewhat. Conditions are better. The food is better. 2 meals a day, maybe, which is all we ever got, but the food was a little bit better. There wasn't any torture. Interrogations were very rare and kind of just formal. So there you are, warehoused. And the United States is in serious negotiations with the North Vietnamese, and we're withdrawing troops from South Vietnam at a very fast rate. So you can easily project ahead, you know what, Americans going to be out of this war and we'll still be here. That was, psychologically, that was the most, it was the darkest time. And physically, I mean, conditions by any standard were poor, but they were so much better than they had been in the past. You're in a cell with 50 guys, so there are people to talk to and all that stuff. But, you know, you can't see the end because it looks like we're going to be withdrawn from Vietnam and we're going to still be in Hanoi. You could project yourself being there for the rest of your life.
And one of the difficulties facing military and civilian alike, and it seems like at an increasing rate in modern society, is episodes where people feel at a loss to cope with their own lives. They're experiencing symptoms of depression. One of the insidious things about depression is you can wake up and have no real reason to not have a good day, but you don't want to get out of bed. And so it's, in a way, it's even more diabolical because people around you are saying, but you have a great life, you should be happy, and yet you're for whatever the chemistry. Can you say something about your own discoveries about how you keep going on a day-by-day basis? There's obviously some in the Hanoi prison system who we lost, and as Red McDaniel said, there are those who lost the fight with the inside. Talk to me, if you can, about the things that can help us keep us going.
There's a lesson. And when I speak to people, this is one thing I emphasize. Hope springs eternal. We were young. We had lives ahead of us. And there was always hope, no matter how grim the situation was. That's very important. And if you look at it, out of all the hundreds of men who were there for all those years, there is not any record of a suicide.
Right. That's extraordinary. It's extraordinary. Well, sir, I also want to make sure that you have a chance, if there's something that I haven't touched on that you would like to offer or speak to, I want to make sure that I cover all the bases.
Well, it's a 6-year experience, though, so there are a lot of things. I can't think of anything right off the spot that I should have said that I haven't said. It was quite an experience. And we still get together, and we're still friends. In fact, we just had a reunion in August. But for me, I always start out my talks about this experience by saying I'm one of the lucky ones. Because, yeah, I was in that war, and yeah, I had a bad time, but here I am still walking around. One of the things that happened when I was a prisoner was after I got into communication net, now I've been a prisoner for maybe 4 months, I'm not sure exactly the timing, and I've gotten into communication net and I'm finding out what's happened. New prisoners come in, they give news about what happened on the ship and so forth. And one of the things I found out was, now I'm at this point having just been through torture and all that stuff, and cursing the war and cursing the leadership that doesn't know how to fight this war. And what I found out was one of my best friends, Dan Moran, one of my classmates from the academy, was shot down and killed 2 days after I was. And so it changes your perspective. Maybe I'm not so unlucky. Because, when I was shot down, the ship was due to go back to the States in about 2 weeks. So I made it almost to the end. And Dan didn't make it to the end at all. And he had a wife, the whole thing.
So what I hear you saying is appreciating what we have is.
Oh, yes. Okay, I had a tough time. It was a lousy tour of duty, if you want to put it that way. But here I am, still walking around, and life has been okay.
And finally, the last thing that I just wanted to touch on a little bit is that so many of your fellow former POWs have spoken about the fellowship and brotherhood that you experienced there, that there were relationships formed there or a feeling for each other that oftentimes people didn't even experience in their own brothers and sisters of their own family, that there was you knew these people, these men would have your back and you would have theirs, and that was a special feeling. Could you speak to that, sir?
Absolutely. I have 2 groups of friends that still matter to me. My classmates from the Naval Academy and my fellow former prisoners. Those are the groups, after all these years, those are the groups I still relate to. Absolutely.
Wonderful. Well, if you have nothing else, sir, then you've been an extraordinary pleasure to talk to, and I hope that I want to just thank you for your service to our nation, for your service to your country, and for sharing this time with me. I mean, I'm just so moved by your stories, so thank you.
Well, thank you. My only regret about the war is, okay, all that pain and suffering, and not just myself. As I say, I'm one of the lucky ones. That the unlucky ones are down on the wall. I wish it had done some good, but it didn't.
I understand, absolutely. Thank you.
Patrick,
Yeah.
one quick thing. We're set up perfectly on the B-roll for the canal. Do you want anything else about the other B-roll?
Yeah, I loved it.
Artwork or?
I loved him talking about walking along the canal.
We got all that, but if we do the artwork or gardening, do you need any verbiage on that?
Do the what?
We were talking about shooting artwork.
Oh,
doing artwork
yeah,
or gardening.
What Ken is talking about now is, when we do your B-roll, sometimes it's nice to have some voiceover talking about, and the things that we anticipate doing are, we went down along the canal on the Potomac and saw
Sure.
some of the beautiful. So we'll get you walking through there, through the forest and
Yeah.
stuff. And maybe even have your dog join you on the walk, because it seems.
Dog is not doing so well. She had an operation a couple weeks ago, and she's still hobbling around.
Okay, so what I thought we do is then just touch, because you mentioned that you're an artist, that you draw or paint, and we thought we'd maybe get you sketching, and that you enjoy yard work around your house. So, maybe we just describe a little bit of that, your hobbies in so that when we film you in it, I have this voiceover that can be saying, this is, and if you could tie it into the, now in my life, I'm allowed to, I can enjoy things as simple as walking along the
Sure.
canals.
Okay, sure.
Speak to that, please.
Sure. Yeah, I can, we can do that. I have, I would not say I'm a good artist or a real one. I did it for a while and I kind of tapered off on it, but I have some stuff that I did do that is around.
In terms of putting it in declarative statements, is it pen and ink? Is it, I enjoy painting, or I enjoy doing drawings, or, like if you could put them in statements like that, then I could cut those right in.
Sure. Okay, I can do that. Yep, no problem. And I can show you some stuff I've done.
Wonderful, we'd love to do that. So
Okay.
if you could make that as a statement, then I'll have it in we won't actually use your image here. We'll
Sure.
cut. So,
Okay, yes, I had a curiosity about drawing. Actually, my first drawing experience was in Hanoi under the instruction of Mike McGrath. One of the things we had in Hanoi, we had these sheets of very rough paper that were ripped up into little pieces to use as toilet paper. And so we had some of these sheets in the cell, in one of the big cells where there were 50 of us. Mike gave me some basic instruction on drawing portraits. In fact, I drew several portraits of other prisoners in the cell. And one day the Vietnamese had a big inspection and they found them and, of course, took them away and destroyed them as far as I know. That was my first experience. And I didn't do anything with it because my life was too busy and hectic until years later, and I took it up sometime, and I have some drawings that I did, a few paintings and so forth.
and because the viewer won't necessarily know, although we're going to be interviewing Mike McGrath, so he will be a part. But you might Mike is known for his pen and ink drawings of the.
Oh, yes, in fact.
And did you see him drawing there in the prison system?
Those drawings were done afterwards. And that little book that he wrote is, if you just want to find out what it was like, that's probably one of the best ones to read.
Great. And other enjoyments you have are walking along the canals, fishing. If you could just describe that.
Well, yeah, I like to get outside. I've done some shooting, although I've lost interest in killing animals. I still belong to a gun club. I do some skeet shooting every so often, things like that. And mostly spending time with my family. That's the real good part, the best part, no question.
And if you could just put it into a phrase, something along the line of, maybe it's the simple things in life that you can appreciate. For instance, I love to walk along the canals near where I am, or
Sure.
look out over the Potomac River, if you could say something along that line.
Well, that's true. I love the outdoors, and I'm lucky to live in an area where there are lots of good places to go for walks. I often walk along the C&O Canal or through the McKee-Beschers Wildlife Management Area, a nice 2,000-acre plot that's open and free to the public and close to the city, in fact. And it's a great place to go for a hike with the dog. I enjoy doing those simple things, but most important of all is spending time with my family. That's the best.
Wonderful, sir. Thank you very much. You ready? Okay. All right. And we're cutting. Thank you.